In this video, we will be discussing Chapter 18 in Economics, Development and Globalization. This is the last chapter that we'll be covering this year. So in this chapter, we're looking at countries that are fully first world country development, and we're looking at countries that are third world and countries that are developing over time. So we're going to look at development and globalization. This chapter really focuses on resources, the factors of production that are across the planet. Over the half of the world's population lives in poverty. An interesting fact is that over half the world, over 3 billion people, only live on $2.50 a day. And at least 80% of humanity lives on less than $10 a day. So we are really in a country that benefits and is prosperous in comparison to the rest of the world. I mean, most 80 world's population lives in countries where income differentials are widening. They don't have a huge middle class. So we're going to talk about these different chapters here, or these different countries. So let's start off with levels of development. How is a nation's level of development defined? So let's take a look at that. By looking in this chart, we can see the different countries of different values of GDP that are out there. So what is development? It is a process by which a nation will improve the economy, political, and social well-being of its people. So levels of development, that's what we're going to look at. Where's the U.S. in comparison to other countries? What are countries that are developing as we go along here? So levels of development, we have three different types. We have developed nations, which would be something like U.S., Japan, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, mostly the Western Hemisphere. And then we have something called an LDC. LDC is a relatively low level of material well-being. So these are third world countries, is typically what we think. And then we're looking at NICs, or NIC countries. And these are countries that are beginning to develop. So LDC would be like Bangladesh, Nepal, Albania, Central South Africa. And then a NIC country would be something like Dubai. So if you look at this background image, you'll see here that in 1991, this is what Dubai looked like. And then the picture on the right is what it looks like in 2013. So things have dramatically changed. Take a minute and pause the video and look up skiing in Dubai. And they have these built-in, basically, hill systems that are covered in snow, even though the outside looks like a desert. So take a second, pause the video, and take a look at that. The next slide here is measuring development. This is GDP per capita, and we looked at this before. This is taking GDP divided by its population to come up with a common number. Things they look at is the factors of production, goods and services being produced, energy consumption, availability of consumers, and social indicators. And then what we find here is that just because a country has a very large GDP number doesn't mean that they're being popular or very GDP per capita is very high. For instance, India has 1.877 trillion people that are in it. $2,000 GDP per capita. Well, Japan has a much smaller population, and they have $38,000 in GDP per capita. So a large country does not necessarily determine it's going to have wealth. So the world is really categorized in three parts: a high, medium, and a low, or a high, a middle, and a low class. So that's really what we're focused on as countries go. Take a second and look up what country has the highest GDP per capita, and just take a look. Where are they located? Why are they so wealthy? What does their population look like? And look at some of these countries that have really high GDP per capita. On the flip side, you could also look at what countries have the lowest GDP per capita. It gives you a perspective. Um, it gives you an idea of where these countries are located. So measuring this development, what are the key areas that we look at when it comes to measuring development? Well, one, energy consumption. Where is their energy being consumed? Higher energy usually means higher industrialization. We think of this for manufacturing, usually, manufacturing products. So the higher the industrialization, probably typically that country is going to be in the higher or to at least middle level of, of wealth. The next thing we look at is labor force. And you can examine what are the jobs that are being offered, or what are the jobs that are primarily being done in a country. If it's farming, it's probably a low development. They're more about survival. No specialization, low efficiency. Everything's about survival. But if their more labor force is more educated in college-bound jobs, they're probably going to have a higher labor force, and their country is going to be at a better place, more specialization, more efficiency. And then what are people buying? Are they buying essentials like seeds to grow in their farms? Is it animals to eat? Or is it non-essentials? Is it brand new boats and houses and everything else? So you look at the energy consumption first to see how their energy is being performed. Then we look at their labor force and then their consumer goods to help find out how they're developing. Other factors is their social indicators, their literacy rate. How many people in their country are able to read that are over the age of 15, read and write? What's their life expectancy? This is also an interesting fact to look up. What country on the planet has the highest life expectancy? And that what country has the lowest? Look at that, look that up and identify why that is. Why is that taking place? And then infant mortality rate. What country has the highest amount of deaths or mortality rate? The infants that are passing away in their first year of life per 1,000 births. So finding these social indicators really helps as well. Literacy rate, who can read, who cannot. How long are people living? And then the infant mortality rate. Other characteristics so we go from measuring development characteristics to what are the characteristics of a developed nation. Well, one is the quality of life. What does life look like in those developed nations? Well, in the U.S., over 50% of Americans have 3 TVs or more. 83% have a computer, and 73% have a high-speed internet. So we are well connected. We are well developed. What about just the quality of life? What does that kind of look like for health-wise? Look up that country. Which country is the healthiest on the planet? The one that focuses maybe on more vegetables and dairy products. What about healthcare, education, high life, low infant mortality rate? And then urbanization and infrastructure. We're not as many farmers as we used to be. Only the 2% of the population in the U.S. are actually farmers because technology has advanced so much. 1840, 69% were farmers. 1940, 18%. So that's what used to do. It was all about survival. And then 80% of Americans live in cities. So you're going to have very high urbanization and infrastructure that takes place. Let's look at the characteristics of an LDC. LDC, you would see low productivity, and you would also find that the higher the population are actually farming. And farming in an LDC is all about survival. I think it was chapter 2 we talked about a traditional economy. It's all about survival. It's all about roles that everyone plays the same thing over and over. It's all about tradition. The quality of life is probably fairly happy, but as far as economically efficient, it's not efficient at all. So you look at the low productivity. This is known as subsistence agriculture. And that is the end of section 1. Again, review on this section here. We talked about a modernized country, an LDC, and a NIC country. These characteristics are good to know and understand when identifying these different types of countries that we'll be looking at.